Welcome to the Blank Canvas podcast, guys. This is the first time I'm doing this, something of this sort. And the idea of this is to connect with people in my network and hopefully with some others who will watch this and want to connect and put their stories out there. I'm going to start off with a series of designers who are in my network, primarily because I work in design. I'm a product designer by profession, and today I have with me one of my closest friends from my college, Sai Ram Ved, who is also a designer. Sai, it's good to have you here. Yeah, you are my first guest on this show, and it's a privilege to have you here. And hopefully, we have a good conversation. So yeah, like let's begin. I think I want to know. I mean, if there's something which I missed out, feel free to introduce yourself, and we can get started.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, very nice words about me you have there. So I'm glad you think so highly of me. And so yeah, again, I work with design and specifically information design, and we can probably get into more of what that means as we move along. And yeah, I'm based in Mumbai, and I currently professionally working in a company, but also freelancing on the side. So
Right.
yeah.
I mean, are you open to disclosing that? Is that fine with your company, or I guess we'll have to cut that out, right? Like,
Shouldn't matter.
shouldn't matter. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's jump in. I think firstly, right, I think we've gotten through with the introduction, but I think a large part of who we are right now, we know each other from college, but I think we didn't enter college with the hopes of exiting as designers because both of us were in engineering streams, right? So I would love to know, like, I think basically what design means to you, right? Because after 3 years of work X, or like 4 years in the sense that you've also been into design from your second year or first year. So what exactly does design mean to you, like, and why should we like know more about your perspective of design rather?
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, a little bit of background. I just like a lot of Indians out there started out, trying to get into engineering and doing like going through courses and side tuitions and all that for uh, when I was in my 12th, 11th, and 12th. And during that time, I found, I spent a lot of time on the internet.
Right.
So through that, I found a couple of like good, good work being done, either through video or movies or poster design, that kind of stuff for the movies. And probably, yeah, I mean, now that I look back at it, I'd probably say movies were sort of my first foray into visual. Uh, I guess, yeah, any visual products.
So if you were to explain in a very broad sense, like what design means to you, I think we'd love to know that as well. Like,
Okay, so yeah, probably what I'd boil it down to is anything that conveys meaning and emotion. Those two words probably I'd associate with it. So yeah, it could be media, it could be an app. It's giving you, something in return when you're interacting with it. Either you're looking at it, you're listening to it, or you're
hmm,
you know going through a physical sort of experience.
right.
Any of those, yeah. So anything that gives you a emotional connect or a meaningful connect.
Cool. I think that sets up enough for people to gauge your perspective on design, right? So we could probably move on to the next set, which I want to know. I think a lot of people who I expect will be the viewers to this will be people who, like us, probably are in undergrad or like probably in high school, and they want to even understand what design is or like what the field has to offer, right? So my question to you would be, right, like what piece of advice you would you give probably an undergrad or a high school student uh, like to break and like find out his niche in design?
Right. So hmm, I don't think I'm as of yet qualified enough to give that kind of advice, but what I can speak to is my experience, right? So
Right.
what I've gone through and what I could have done to probably accelerate to be where I am right now. So one of that would probably be to just uh, relentlessly explore and like network with people,
Hmm.
because back then I didn't I mean, I was in my own bubble, and the worldview that I had was, okay, these folks are doing engineering, you just sit in your room, you study, and yeah, I mean, you pass your exams and whatnot. But speaking to other folks and trying to get their experience, I think that's what like mattered a lot during university time, when I was trying to get into design, because of the exposure, essentially. So even if you have like a sort of little inkling of interest into something, it's better to reach out and to ask folks for their advice, and ask folks how they ended up there. Because
Hmm.
I mean, there's no downside to it. The
Exactly.
worst that can happen is they say no and they
Right.
decline and they don't want to answer you. So
Okay. This is something which I've not put down in the list of questions also. But good follow up again to this question is, a lot of people right now are being led to think that your design break will come through a portfolio. I think the pool which applies to one particular entry level job or like an internship also is quite high. So is there anything one can do to like stand out in that sense, or like, because not everyone will have the time to build a website while also studying or probably doing their exams. So website can probably not be the only source of truth for your portfolio. It can be as simple as a PDF also, for that matter. But how do you think you can showcase your own skill sets in a way which can catch the eyes of the person who's recruiting? And
so the important thing, I think, is to have your lived experience show through, and not just be some sort of inspiration from the others around you, but something that that can showcase uh, what you've been through. So I mean, so more specific example I could give, like for example, you're building a portfolio, and for that you're looking out for work that others have done.
hmm,
But I mean, that's, of course, that is important, and that's something that can guide your process. But then, to have to stand out from the crowd, it's I mean, you're essentially if you're doing the same thing as the others, then that's not going to happen, right?
right.
So at least what I feel is that putting something that you or your from your environment that you've seen as interesting, or you that has inspired you
Hmm,
specifically, putting something from there, a piece of work, creating something, using that as inspiration instead of looking for inspiration from others' work. That that's probably one key thing that at least I feel I started doing more and more as of late.
Okay. So I probably will contradict this in the sense that if you've read the Austin Kleon's body of work, right? That I think what's the name? I forgot the name of the book, but Steal Like an Artist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he has this very different point of view wherein he says every piece of work essentially is a mix of work you've stolen, in that sense. Uh, so whilst it is, I think the point you showcase wherein you say you can't directly, I mean, your work should reflect your own belief and your own vision of design. Uh, for most people that is a very overwhelming thought, right? Like, how do I find something which is my own style, right? Because especially when you're starting out, I think it's difficult to look at it from that point of view. But I think yeah, the more you consume, I think artists other artists' work, you'll probably mix and match and eventually get to a style which you can call truly yours, in that sense. So yeah, I think that's how I'd contradict. Do you have any thoughts to this?
Yeah, so I mean, I do have a couple of thoughts. So one thing is, yeah, so it's one thing to look at other artists' work and steal from that, and let that inspire you. Or I mean, other artists, as in, let's say, you want to do poster design.
Mm,
So the first thought that comes to mind is, look at other posters, look at other artists who do posters, and get inspiration from there. But to break out of that, essentially, is to look for inspiration and steal from places you wouldn't think of stealing from for your
mm,
niche. So for example, you take a walk, look at the environment, see a tree, and get inspired from that, for example.
Hmm.
Or look at a movie and use elements from that into a poster design.
Hmm.
uh, Something that's not necessarily directly related to the niche that you're working in, but to have this sort of lived experience to explore other things and use that to fuel your inspiration for what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean that's again a very nice point you bring up, because I think most people will go in that easier route where they'll open up Dribble to find probably similar looking things, mix and match, and get into it.
Right, right.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's a good point. I think yeah, we can probably move on to know a bit more about your niche now. I think in terms of looking at information design, right? So first off, right? So what exactly is information design for people who don't know what it is? Because uh, and I think a big part of it also comes from data visualization, which is something you proudly showcase in your portfolio as well. So help us understand what that is.
Yeah, so speaking about information design, so I mean, it is exactly what the terms say. So information essentially is anything and everything around you that can turn into data.
Hmm.
And data doesn't necessarily mean numbers like zeros and ones. That is one part of it, of course, but there's you can categorize it as qualitative, quantitative. It can be somebody's emotions that are being captured. That can be a data.
Hmm.
Like yeah, essentially that all of that comes into information, and design is essentially what you're portraying that and what you're sort of molding that information into to showcase to the larger audience.
Hmm.
So there are, I mean, I'd say two different ways you could go about it. One of which is the sort of formalized definition of uh, information design and data visualization, which is looking at pie charts or bar graphs and getting meaning out of those. Your standard boardroom meeting presentation
Hmm.
stuff. And the second aspect to it is a more broader, more generalized view of data that the first one that I spoke about was very specific. Okay, only let's say a CEO can consume that, or only
Hmm.
few people or managers of a company can consume that data and they can understand it. The other part of it is a larger audience can consume it and they can get to know what you're talking about.
Hmm.
And that could be through either data journalism or through filmography, so on.
Okay. Wait, what's data journalism?
Okay, so data journalism is to sort of mold data into stories that a larger audience can read or go through. Not just read, but go through and understand and connect with the story. So, for example, there's a lot of coverage on COVID-19, right?
Hmm.
So stories on, let's say, how that sort of evolved and how that fell off and how humans adapted to it. All of
Right,
those can come into data journalism. So essentially, a take on telling narratives based on data.
right. Okay. So you capture data and then you connect it with real world uh, things that have happened and try to connect it and present it in a way which is more consumable, right? Than maybe a slide deck or something like that, where it's more
Yes, yes.
engaging.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the point you said, that sort of makes perfect sense in the way that it depends on the consumer. If it's a larger audience, then it can go as a journalism piece, or it can be a
Hmm.
general consumer piece. But if it's a very specific focused thing, like let's say a company dashboard or a slide deck, that's more focused to a smaller audience, and that comes under traditional meaning of data visualization.
Most people right now, if they're still with us over here, they're probably more curious about this field. So, and they're probably exploring options if they can venture into this field as well. So, how big do you think is this market right now? And I think, from my understanding, even if you look at uh, branding as such, right, and marketing, the whole narrative of how companies have advertised, marketed, has moved from a standard way of selling a product to more of a storytelling, where they want the audience to connect with the product and there's a much richer background to the overall product, right? So I think at this point of time, information design can actually become a very huge like potential avenue for people to come in and collaborate and create some really meaningful campaigns. So I think a couple of examples which I have the top of my head is the Spotify Wrapped, where they're capturing data and creating something which people are honestly like raving about every year. And now most companies have like joined that bandwagon and stuff, right? So with that said, I think even at this point of time, do you think there is a lot of room for people to enter in, and how big do you think this is going to be in the in the following couple of years?
Okay, so yeah, speaking of the current market as we have it right now, there aren't any specific jobs for an information designer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially if we're speaking about India, then even more so here, because the work that I was speaking about. So let's say creating graphs, creating charts, or creating dashboards, that kind of work is usually done by an analyst or a designer themselves. So the stuff that you're talking about, the Spotify app, so again, those kind of things can be done by a design team themselves, but
Mm-hmm.
having a specialized information designer on the team, that could lead to a more informed decision making process, and making sure that the experience that is delivered to the end consumer actually makes sense from a data and a design standpoint. So
Mm-hmm.
as of now, there's no like specific job title for this, but in the US, in the UK, I've seen quite a few independent folks that are doing this. Even in India, there's a few independent artists, independent designers who are specializing in information design and trying to make this a bigger, larger community.
So, do you see this becoming a probably a potential job role, or like which companies will adopt, or will it be like this, where it's just freelancers who onboard into a company as a project and get this done for them?
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, I don't see it getting as big as, let's say, a UX role or UI
Mm-hmm.
UX role, because, of course, the consumer market is in that way, right? Because people who are consuming, you don't always want to see data or information. You might
Mm-hmm.
want to just look at, I mean, it depends, of course, but as per my perspective, I don't see it getting really big. But
Mm-hmm.
of course, the specialized folks who do niche out into this can, have a more informed opinion on other parts of the design space.
Okay, so I think let's move on to the next part of this. I think you've already answered this to a certain extent, which was to where you look at inspiration, right? Which is you said you go out of the usual routes of looking at probably collections of websites and stuff, and you would rather find it in nature and stuff. So, probably, do you have a good example of your own project, or a project you really admire as to how they've derived this inspiration from, and how people can, uh, like harness this skill in their own, I guess, experiences?
Okay, so yeah, coming to specific inspirations, I can probably go to. I mean, in India itself, there's a few folks I was mentioning, who do this kind of information design or work with data in a creative way.
Hmm.
So a couple of names I can probably think of. Soumya Mittal is one.
Okay.
So folks who put in, again, these people are folks who've done other sort of graphic design studies and then moved into doing data work.
Hmm.
So there's a project series that's a collection of zines, basically,
Hmm.
of different things about immigrants, about the environment, the forest concerns that we have here. So it's yeah, and when we look out of this sort of bubble, there's a lot of news organizations that work with uh, that do really good work. So if you look at New York Times, they
Hmm.
have very often they have a lot of interactive pieces that go into looking at data. For example, very recently there was a piece on electric vehicle market and
Hmm.
how that can rise. So again, that sort of blended in a lot of web design and visual design elements along with data and interaction.
Okay. So I think speaking about your own body of work, I distinctly remember your motion design come data visualization project called Frondescence, right? Where you essentially tried to depict the forest cover of India for different states with a very unique take of how it was visually showcased. So,
Hmm.
what was the genesis of thinking in this way where and how did you like go about building this, right? It's a very interesting piece. I think I would encourage all of you to probably go check it out. I'll probably try to put some visual whilst we're talking about this, but the link also I'll try to put it somewhere in the description to this so you guys can check it out as well. But yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, so for that piece specifically, okay, let me take a step back and just give a broader sort of view of what my aims are to do with my work. Yeah, so I want to sort of move out of this specified view of information and data, that there are these data points and you we put them on a plane, and we look at regular graphs and such. If you think about data, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably a bar chart or
Yeah.
a couple of numbers, right?
Correct.
But what I want to do is move away from that, because let's say you have a topic like COVID,
Mm,
or anything that involves humans, right?
mm,
You're essentially reducing a human experience uh, to a number or to a
mm,
sort of color on the screen, and all of that experience is just lost.
mm,
So if you have, let's say, 100,000 people who've gone through something, and you're just sort of reducing that to one point on a bar chart
mm,
or on a scatter plot, that doesn't really give detailed narrative about the experience that the person has gone through.
mm,
So what I aim to do is to bring that sort of emotional connect with data, and that's where all the inspiration that I take from when I look at movies or when I look at other media, apart from the regular information or data visualization. That's where it comes into play, where I want to incorporate those emotional connects with the viewer.
mm. Okay.
Right. So, which is why now coming back to the specific piece that we're talking about, Frondescence,
Mm,
that is the primary reason why I chose to, incorporate music and make it a sort of experimental short film in a sense,
mm.
instead of just showing, okay, the state has, this much percentage of forest cover, and instead showcased it in a sort of motion piece where the viewer can be engaged and have some sort of emotional connect to the subject matter.
I think yeah, that's true because I remember the first time I saw it, and you're taken aback basically because one, when you go full screen on that film particularly, right? You are witnessing essentially a black canvas, and there's moving pieces of green where are you're tied to that whole story. Right now, if you know each state how they're doing with their I think forest cover essentially. So what I found interesting was there were a lot of times when I was shocked because my perception of this state being green or probably not green was actually challenged in that video. And had I seen the same thing probably in a bar chart, it wouldn't have made as much impact on my brain, wherein I would not remember this maybe 6 months down the line. So, yeah, I think that is a very good reference for information designers out there to start off and probably figure out a good example for them, I would say.
A lot of brilliant work out there in this field. So again, another name I'll probably throw out is Rafi Canadol. He
Okay.
does a lot of data art in a sense where it's not essentially to get precise information out of the data, but
Mm.
to instead again have that emotional connect with it, to see how it's moving through time, how the data is changing, and just have an experience in a sense.
Yeah, I think I'll just that's my follow up question of your references. But one quick thing, I think for me, like one very interesting information design piece, which I think I shared with you on Instagram or Twitter somewhere, was this person who had tried this artist in I think somewhere in UK who tried to capture the number of people who had collectively experienced something through rice particles, right?
In looking into ideas for the show, we found the statistic of all the people that were made homeless by the Great Fire, and that got us thinking about contemporary parallels. So in this version of the show, we have a pile of rice that represents all the refugees in the world today. The power of this show in changing the world is giving the basis of where do we go from here, how can the world change, what needs to change, what doesn't need to change.
I think we can pull up that
Right.
picture, and they actually
I
show like the number of people who've had COVID, and there's so many different. I think World War I, and they made this whole pile of rice. So when you look at it in that sense, it's something which is very different in the sense that you wouldn't tie rice particles with this event, but the way they thought and connected it makes perfect sense. Like they also have this Titanic, the number of people who died as compared to some people who died in this riot, and it's very distinct, but people care more about this small event versus that which should have been a bigger thing. And it puts a lot of stories into perspective, and yeah, I think it's a very powerful field in that sense when I look back upon it. Yeah, interesting. You moved from graphic design into database, right, and then into information design formally per se. So if you were to just recall all of the tools that you learned, right, or the only ones that you think are required at this point of time for someone who's just starting out in design, what would you think, and how would you recommend they go about learning it as well? Like,
Okay, I mean, when I was starting out, the sort of go-to tools were the Adobe stuff, so Illustrator, Photoshop.
hmm,
But nowadays, there's a lot more options to choose from out there. There's Affinity, which does a
hmm,
lot of like, I mean, it's more better for your wallet, I'd say.
hmm,
There's even free ones like Figma, which I mean, you can use any tool that can get the job done. So I look at it as a more tool agnostic mindset.
hmm,
So I try to find the narrative that I'm trying to tell and not focus much on the tool which I'm going to use. I mean, of course, it's nice to have information on what kind of tools are available and how to use them so that you can utilize them or you can make that connection when you have an idea to execute it. But then again, I'd probably say not to focus on a specific tool as such, at
hmm,
least for the kind of work that I'm hoping to do. Right.
hmm,
So I try to go back to using code and try to create things with code directly. So there's JavaScript libraries like P5JS, or there's even processing. Processing
hmm,
Foundation has a software called Processing, and these are a lot more flexible to work with, a little harder to learn, of course, but
hmm,
they're easier to sort of, you can execute whatever you have in your mind, right? And so I mean, yeah, they are a little hard to learn. So you need to have an idea about coding in general,
hmm,
which a lot of people might not be open to. So there are other tools, for example, which have built on top of this coding idea,
hmm.
that are called visual coding tools, so node-based coding tools.
Okay.
So you might remember, maybe when, if you took any sort of introductory coding class back in, school days,
Hmm,
there'd be code blocks, which is essentially, is used to teach kids about how to code. And there's like these little code blocks which say, okay, this is a loop, and you can attach other things to it visually
hmm,
to sort of visually connect that code. So there are tools out there now which you can use to alleviate that coding bit of it. So there's Blender, which has a lot of node-based abilities.
hmm,
There's other tools like Circles or Touch Designer. They're
hmm.
also in node-based.
So, okay, assuming this is your persona, right? Like, if let's say probably an average business marketeer or like a marketing exec in a company wants to do what you said, which is wants to cut out the existing stack of bar charts, scatter plots, what have you, and wants to create a richer experience with how they present their data, right? What do you think? I mean, and they don't have the same amount of time as a full-fledged designer to pick up any of these very professional tools and showcase. So, what would you recommend they do, like in this scenario, if they want to just like amplify their whole data visualization part?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of creative ways of just using whatever tools you're currently using to get data. For example, there's plugins in Figma that utilize that you can feed in an Excel sheet, and it can you can use that to sort of inform decisions about visuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, more specifically, what I'm trying to say is, let's say you have a gradient on your site, and uh, let's say it's the backdrop of your site. Just
Mm.
I'm just trying to riff ideas
Sure.
as quickly
Mm.
as I can. So yeah, you can sort of maybe let the data from let's say your profits, I don't know, this is a very bad example, but any sort of numbers decide the
Color.
color, what that
Mm.
color is going to be. So yeah, I mean, there's ways of doing that within CSS also, or if you want to map that into Figma, there's also plugins that do that.
Hmm. Okay, so essentially, what you're trying to say is don't emphasize so much on the tool as much as on what you want to present. And then, if you have the time, pick up a good tool, or if not, just try to use something you know and try to execute it with plugins or whatever help you can from the
Yeah, I
community,
mean,
right?
so yeah, you already know the tools you have. So better idea would be to utilize that knowledge creative ways to achieve
Hmm.
what you want to achieve, right? Instead of
True.
again spending a lot of time to learn a separate tool, which can be rewarding. I'm not saying
Hmm.
that's a bad thing, but again, if you want to achieve something right now, it's probably better to just use the tools that you have with you.
True. I think that's a piece of advice which most creatives don't like to give because most of them are obsessed over picking up tools, new tools, mastering them and stuff. But very few actually end up. I mean, I think the most serious ones try to use whichever works quickest for them and put out stuff. I think that's something which I'm even known being guilty of, which is I don't think I obsess over what is the perfect way to note take, what is the perfect way to calendar, and all of it. I think end of the day that just adds more roadblocks to you executing your thoughts, and it dilutes the entire process as such. That's a good piece of advice. All right, I think yeah we can probably get into couple of professional insights now because I think you've already had 2.5 years of experience. I won't go too deep into all of that, but a general like quick sort of question answer segment where you can probably give this. I mean, this is tailored for people who are probably in their final years of college where they like they can figure out ways to crack into a design heavy or like some aspect of a role with design involved in it and better themselves as designers overall, right? So first off, right, what do you think are a set of red flags for designers? Like what if you had a list of things that you consider red flags?
So, okay, yeah, I didn't quite get what you meant by that, even when you shared the question. So, what do you mean red
Okay.
flags? So,
So I would say, right, like if you were to ask me, a red flag in a designer would be not being open to, I think, one networking, like you said, because a lot of bread and butter for a designer comes when they meet humans, because you can't design for humans essentially if you're not talking enough to them or like in general experiencing uh, a human connection and interaction, right? So being closed off in that sense, I would consider a red flag. Two would be again like say, on those lines being empathetic in the same way where like if you're not empathetic enough to uh, look at another human's story or an experience and feel the same things with them, you wouldn't be the best person to storytell in that sense. So that is again something which I think a designer has to have to some extent in their daily life. So yeah, stuff like that, right? Where I'm trying to just find out what are those small things which potential designers can hone alongside all of their design skills and stuff to generally become better at design. And these are more subjective in that sense.
okay, yeah, I mean, I'd say someone who's, yeah, not open to looking at other forms of media
Mm.
and let that inspire the work. I'm probably sort of repeating again what we discussed back
Yeah, that's fine. I think
a
it's like a
few.
summary. So
15 minutes back. Yeah. So, yeah, what I'd say is just try to have more lived experiences so that they can inform what you're trying to do in a better sense. So, yeah, I guess
Hmm.
that would probably be my 2 cents on it.
Cool, nice. I think couple of other things, like you'd already mentioned two people, I think, in your previous answer as to who they were your top inspirations, right? So uh, apart from that, right, like if you have to categorize your top five go-to references, it could be products, it could be product design studios, companies, or films for that matter, since you take a lot of inspiration from films, right? So if you had a list, who would be in your top five?
Okay. So, yeah, inspiration is obviously it always keeps changing. What I'm inspired by last month is probably not what I'm inspired by this month. But yeah, there are a few that have been there, the constants that
Yes.
that I keep looking up to, the work that I keep admiring. So
Hmm.
in terms of database, there's this company called The Pudding.
Hmm.
They do again data journalism pieces and very interactive stuff on the web. So they have pieces like uh, kind of that look at current events, current trends, and pick out what's pick out very interesting things about it. So, for example, let's say a trend of pocket sizes in women's jeans. That's the kind of topics they work with, and I
Hmm.
really like the sort of quirky topics and the quirky interactions they incorporate into their website. So yeah, that was probably one of the constant that's been there since the beginning of when I got into this.
Okay.
The others, I'd say, yeah, like again, New York Times,
Hmm.
any good journalism pieces.
Hmm.
uh, New York Times, Financial Times, they have really like nice interactive stuff. New Yorker, uh, and even I mean, if we move out of this journalistic view, there's other companies like Media Work or Pentagram that do like really great branding and general design work as well.
Hmm.
Yeah. In terms of movies, well, there's it's always sort of changing and evolving. So there's probably the few constants that I keep looking at. There's a French film called Amelie that
Hmm.
has a very distinctive style, and it's very sort of upbeat and cute. It has like this sort of warm tone to it. So yeah, stuff like that.
Nice. Okay. I think one thing I forgot to mention also about you, which I think adds on to a little bit of your design style and personality, is you are probably the only person I know who consumes any genre of movie without any judgment, and you don't have inhibitions to consume any sort of, I think, genre, because most people pick a few and then just watch those. But a lot of it is also from the fact that you read, I think, a lot of manga, you consume anime as such, and you also game, as far as I know. So a lot of visual design, I think, aspects come in from those things, right? Do you think there is some truth to that, or?
Yeah, again, that comes back to the earlier point. Try to delve into as much media as
Hmm.
I try to delve into as much media as I can to gain that sort of lived experience to see what other creatives have been doing, not just
Hmm.
in the field that I'm working in, so that I can quote unquote steal from them and try to incorporate them, and maybe not just for the purpose of for my own work, but just to enjoy what the others are making.
Right. Okay. So here's the Moneyball question of this whole podcast, which most people are asking most people right now, and I want to do the same. I'll probably cut a little bit of this and put it in the intro just for a little more engagement. And yeah, so what's your take on AI, right? So we have been like literally going through what could be the most dystopian phase of humanity. I think we are living through it, wherein the past 3 years or 2 years have seen so many like new AI breakthroughs, and essentially what very few people predicted 10 years ago is actually happening right now, and it's disrupting fields across design, coding, what have you. So I would want to know what's your take on AI as a whole, and specifically in design, if you have thoughts to it, and should someone actually consider taking up or like going through the whole ordeal of studying software design, or just give up because most entry level jobs are probably going to be taken by AI. There's this underlying Twitter, I mean, like conversation with most people are having that, right? So about AI just like shutting down shop of this. So what's your take on this?
So, my take is that yeah, there is some truth to it that AI is putting people out of jobs, and that's definitely concerning in the moment, of course, because
Hmm.
people's livelihoods are depending on the work that they do, and probably not something that I can answer to fully. But what I think is that it's sort of displacing the jobs instead of taking over. And when I say that, what I mean is the folks who are the sort of creative things that AI is doing right now,
Hmm.
the somebody is building that AI as well, right? So
Right.
that's there. And but in the sense that if people should just give up what they're doing and take up AI and go into that, in that sense I'd probably say no. Just if it's something what you want to do, then that makes sense. If it lends into the creative practice, then that makes sense. But otherwise, I think it can act as an assisting tool to sort of enhance the work, at least that I'm doing. And instead of completely thinking about it in a negative sense that it's going to take over my job and it's going to ruin my life, which I mean, which may be the case for some people, which is why again this is which is why it's being talked about so much. So
Hmm. Okay. So you have a balanced view wherein it is going to consume a few jobs, but people who still are interested in design and coding can still go ahead and learn and build parallelly and use as AI as an assistant tool.
yeah, and I mean, as we move along, there will be much easier to use tools that we can use. We can assist our work with AI
Hmm.
instead of completely replacing our work with AI, and that I feel will be a sort of will produce greater assets, will produce greater work than what we're seeing now.
Hmm. Cool. Uh, I think last couple of questions. This is completely open to your discussion of you choosing to answer or not. We are fine with it. You're not obligated to answer it. But so let's get into a little bit of mental health and well-being, right? So I think a creative from that aspect, like any creative in his own field, especially if you are working, is expected to be creative 100% of the time at work. So because if you take into parallel, if you look at a job like coding or like business development or HR, you have a certain framework which you're expected to follow and give your output in the same way, right? So day in day out you can follow systems, procedures, and get your work done and you're done with it. But for a creative, especially in visual design or advertising and stuff, there's a lot of pressure wherein they're supposed to come up with very new things time and time again, while still adhering to probably the brand's norms and stories and stuff, right? It can get very difficult and cause probably a lot of burnout in that sense. So how do you deal with that whole aspect of being creative 24/7, or like at least in your working profession?
Yeah, I I mean, what I do whenever I face burnout is I take a break because that's what feels most natural to me.
Hmm.
And if that sort of impacts the work that I'm doing, then it does. I mean, I can't do anything about it, right? But taking a break and going out or having some comfort food, and then coming back to it with a fresh mind, that's probably what would help the most, even for the end outcome, as compared to just going through it even when you're
Uh,
facing the creative block.
so by break, do you mean like a short walk or something, or but like it can also get to a point where it can be days, multiple days at a time, right? Like an entire week you would not be up for just finishing the tasks, and even a small task would feel like a huge thing to just overcome. So I think in that scenario, which would probably be considered as a larger, like serious, more serious burnout case, uh, I don't think a short break would be the ideal solution. So have you experienced that firstly? And if not, I think we can jump to the next question because
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I probably can't answer that because I myself haven't ever
Okay.
experienced that so far.
Cool.
Yeah.
And that's fair. I think we'll probably have someone later down the line who can get us to explain this. But yeah,
Mhm.
a follow up again to one of these questions. Again, if you are open to share with us, what are some of the biggest mental challenges you face personally in terms of again design and or like your own information design, like just competition, collaboration, overwhelming imposter syndrome, could be anything. And how have you, like broken? I mean, like cut that pattern down and then just back at it.
Right. So, I think, yeah, we've touched upon this a little earlier as well, that, I was very closed off at the beginning, starting the creative journey. So I wouldn't really, talk to others about what I
Hmm.
was doing or share my work as often. But yeah, what I realized was that, and especially, what I realized when I saw other creatives who've been thriving, is that they often, mm, uh, it's a collaborative thing, right?
Hmm.
So discussing with others and networking with others, or sharing your work, even though if it's like small sketches or even photograph you clicked here and there,
Hmm.
that probably that's probably what helped me to sort of cope with uh, not just being closed off to new ideas.
Okay. Hmm. Interesting. So I think from what I know of you, you actually pushed yourself to go out and network yourself, right? It's not something which naturally comes to you to generally
Right.
go be social. So you forced yourself to
Mhm.
be in these situations, even though it took a lot of internal energy, and it paid off in that sense. You would say, right?
Yeah. So I mean, one point I can probably look at, one inspiration at least. There's this musician called Jacob Collier.
Hmm.
He, okay, you know of him.
Yeah, yeah, I like him. I like his work as well. He visited
Okay, okay.
Bangalore, and I missed his show, but yeah.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, I got a chance to visit one of his shows in
Oh,
Delhi,
nice.
and throughout his body of work and throughout what, how he presents itself, uh, I found it very, joyous, because he's engaging in creativity. His sort of entire shtick is he's collaborating with others, and all his albums that he's put out till now are more sort of collaborative pieces. So he's just sort of having fun along the way, right?
Right.
So, and that's probably what I stole from him, essentially, is to is to just have fun at whatever that I'm doing, and yeah, alongside that, whatever creative outputs that come out, that's sort of just a nice outcome.
Cool. I didn't know this about you, Sai. Nice. We gotten a little bit closer, I think, with this revelation. Okay, so I think yeah, like let's probably conclude it. We've crossed 1 hour on this, but okay. So two questions, I think, for final thoughts. What's next in the Sairam chapter, right? So what have you planned for your next phase or your next leg of the journey? And where can we, okay, I think a follow up to that would be, where can we find your work?
Yeah, so I mean, I plan on sticking with portraying data visually or in an audio sensorial experiences, to say. So
Mhm.
yeah, I plan on studying different methods of doing that and creating work, and yeah, just see where that takes me.
Cool.
And you can find my work at my website, sairamved.com. Yeah, my name. Yeah.
Yeah, link in description again. All right, Sairam, I think this has been amazing. Like for a first podcast, I've had a lot of fun. I feel much closer to you as a friend, and as a designer, my respect for you has increased because honestly, like I think there's a lot of things which I truly learn from your way of looking at life in that sense because. My approach at design is much more rigid and I mean compared to yours which is I look at design more in the function over form thing. uh, it has paid off in the sense that yeah I can get interfaces to work and stuff but I always have this yearning of being more learning more about form in the sense to create a more enriching experience. So I think I would like to thank you first for taking so much time out on a Saturday and testing out this new tool and this whole series. And I hope that we can make something meaningful of this series, and you can probably come back a few more times on this show, and we'll progress through Sairam's journey on this podcast, hopefully. Yeah, thanks, Sairam. I think this is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me. And